There is nothing we cannot accomplish.
Vermont's a small state, 660,000 people. In some places that's a medium city, but that's Vermont. Vermonters expect to see their governor, a member of House, members of the U.S. Senate. They expect to see them and talk to them. Our governor's home phone number is listed in the telephone book. You can call the governors. The elected officials of Vermont are true Vermonters. They never lose that air.
We share breakfast almost daily in the Senate cafeteria and have for the past 19 years. It has become something of a joke in the Senate to say that when Mike Mansfield speaks, you know what George Aiken is thinking.
Interestingly enough, when I got into the Senate, someone who took me under his wing was very powerful in the Senate. And we'd have breakfast together, lunch together, and sat together in the committees, and we still talk to each other on a daily basis. His name is Dick Mazza, and he's a senator from Grand Isle. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican.
The real deal is Phil Scott for our next governor.
I believe that we as Vermonters are fiercely independent. It's part of our DNA, and I believe it comes from our compassion for our neighbors, but our tolerance as well.
We respect each other. We live next to each other. We may have different opinions, but we treat each other as human beings first, and then as conservatives or liberals or Democrats or Republicans second. And that's what's lacking in this country right now. People are so anxious for power that they believe the only way you can succeed is to demonize the other. That is fatal to the country in the long run. And Vermont's a great example of what happens when you don't do that.
So the erosion of trust is a big flaw in our democratic system. And I think in Vermont, because you can talk to your legislator, trust is more firmly established here.
And I think the labels of Democrat and Republican are not as important as Vermonter. As unfortunately, my more liberal cohorts in the Democratic Party will remember, I got along very well with Republicans. Some of them were saying, well, why do we need a Republican governor? We've got Dean.
You're talking with someone who's served in the minority their entire political life. I've never served in the majority.
Please join us in welcoming Vermont's next governor, Phil Scott.
For those of you who voted for Sue or Bill or someone else, I want you to know that I will work for each and every one of you, just as I will for every Vermonter as your next governor. Thank you.
Voting for the person over the party, I think, is something that is fairly special in Vermont. Many, after I became governor, had asked, how could you possibly become governor as a Republican when you have Bernie Sanders representing your state? And I remember one of Sanders' signs next to one of mine. And I thought, this is really unique. From a political standpoint, we're probably 180 degrees apart. But I think Vermonters trust their candidates. We're a very small state. They get to know you.
When you're really small, I think Vermonters sense a phony perhaps more readily, because we are going to see you at the fair, at the supermarket, at the service station. And we expect to.
I was working at a senior center in Burlington, and Pat and Marcel Leahy were there. And so we chatted, and during that day, I ran into him 4 or 5 other times. And we just came around the corner and looked at each other and laughed, you know. The sense of community that we have in Vermont, that we share even with our politicians, is one of the things that I really appreciate about being a Vermonter.
I'll go from my office in Burlington up to a place to buy a newspaper. It's only about 3 or 4 blocks. It could take me an hour and a half. So many people stop and talk, but you're accessible. And that makes a big difference. I've never had a reaction this positive, ever.
Well, I think that kind of access is something we do come to expect. The legislators here, except for the leaders, don't have individual offices. I vividly recall someone coming to see me from an organization in Washington, D.C. when I was in the House, and we met right outside the House chamber, and he said, well, now we can go to your office. And I said, you're in it. We don't have offices here. What's on your mind?
If you try to fake it in Vermont, you're not going to be elected very long. I think they look for people who, even if they disagree with them, are being honest with them. Trust me on this. It's sort of like what you see is what you get.
It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. They just want to know what kind of person you are. And I think that's what makes Vermont special.
Because it's a smaller, it feels like people are more engaged, more involved. They can talk to one another. Whether in New York City, it's more individual. You don't have the sense of community.
This election is you.
I wanted to enjoy the democracy of this moment. All these people voting, and people who are really anxious to support their candidates.
Party labels aren't the be-all, end-all that maybe they used to be. I think this is a state that likes the fact that it's small, that cherishes its ability to meet in the legislature and come up with maybe solutions that haven't been tried elsewhere.
You really have to be able to work with people from different points of view and different political parties in order to get anything done. You sit in a committee room and there's usually 5 or maybe 7 people in a committee, and you're making major policy decisions that are going to affect the state of Vermont and the people who live here. And yet it's a fairly small group of you that are formulating that policy, which puts you in a position of great power, but it also puts you in a position where you really have to have confidence in each other and build the kind of trust that's important to getting things done. So I find it really fulfilling, the fact that we can find ways to work with each other.
Pat Leahy has been a leader in this country, and certainly in our state. And let's welcome Senator Pat Leahy.
I'm the only Democrat ever elected in Vermont's history, but I've also served longer than anybody of either party in the U.S. Senate. I think back to the 15,000 votes I cast on behalf of Vermonters, and I have lifelong gratitude to my former colleague, Senator Stafford of Vermont. Senator Stafford, Mr. Republican, took me under his wing and guided me. And I think when you look at where I get votes, they go across the political spectrum. The high-tech companies.
I'm a very bad Republican. I'm a very good neutral person, and party was never interested me at all. I'm no more a Republican than I am a Democrat. I'm not about party.
And we'll respect our committee work, and then we'll have a vote. And I think that's direct and the way it should be.
Ultimately, I think it just comes down to being a Vermonter who would like things to keep getting better.
I'm certainly a strong Democrat, but I never have thought that party was what really mattered. What really matters is what's good for the state. And I really do believe that Vermont, for whatever faults it may have, is the best run state of all the 50, and I've spent plenty of time in all 50. And it's partly because people respect each other.
Being a Vermonter goes well beyond the party label. It just is an identity that we all appreciate.
In our society, to give people a safer place to be.
I don't think I would have wanted to serve in any other state, because in Vermont it is still human. It's still person to person. It's very intimate connections.
Well, I don't think that you could walk into the State House in New York State and sort of run into the governor just walking down the hall and have a conversation. And I think that that's really unique, and that's part of what makes Vermont special. And it's part of what allows us to make tough decisions that are then accepted by the population, because people know that everybody's been heard and listened to as much as possible. So I think that's really a remarkable thing about Vermont.
Thank you.
Production funding for Beyond Bernie was provided in part by 3 Hats Bookkeeping.
Do you want to spend less time bookkeeping? Meet 3 Hats Bookkeeping. We pair you with a dedicated bookkeeping team. Each month, your team categorizes your transactions into accurate financial statements. Bookkeeping done for you.